So hey guys, welcome back to another interesting podcast. Today we have सिद्धार्थ सर. सिद्धार्थ सर यार IIT दिल्ली से हैं और इनकी जो जर्नी है वो बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है. पहले ये माइक्रोसॉफ्ट में जॉब करते थे एंड देन अभी फेसबुक में जॉब कर रहे हैं. तो फेसबुक यूएस में. तो इनकी जो जर्नी है बहुत ज़्यादा इंटरेस्टिंग है. पूरा बता रहे हैं कंप्लीट रोड मैप आप लोगों को कि अगर आपको फेसबुक ज्वाइन करना है एज अ सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियर तो क्या स्टेप्स हैं आपके लिए. क्या खाली IITian ही कर सकते हैं, जो टायर 3 या नॉर्मल कॉलेज से क्या वो बंदे नहीं जॉब कर सकते. इस सवाल का जवाब हम इस पॉडकास्ट में जान रहे होंगे. अगर आप सोच रहे हो कि फेसबुक ज्वाइन करना है तो डेफिनेटली आई कैन से कि अगर आप ये पॉडकास्ट देखते हो तो डेफिनेटली आपके जो चांसेस है वो इंक्रीज हो जाएंगे फेसबुक ज्वाइन करने के लिए. पूरा कंप्लीट रिसोर्सेज एंड रोड मैप आपको पता चल जाएगा इस वीडियो में. तो बने रहो इस वीडियो में. चलो इस इंटरेस्टिंग वीडियो को स्टार्ट करते हैं. And welcome Siddharth sir, thank you for coming. Please, over to you sir.
Hey Samir, thanks for having me. Yeah, so as Samir said, my name is Siddharth. I graduated from IIT Delhi in 2013 and I immediately got a job in US with an on-campus placement. So since then I've been in the software engineer industry for 9 years. Right now I'm in Facebook for the last 2 years. Before this I was in Microsoft Redmond for like 6 years. So yeah, the entirety of my career has been in US. So a lot of my answers would be US specific. मुझे exactly idea है नहीं अभी इंडिया में industry. मतलब there are some resources which I'll say here which will be US specific. I'm sure India में भी it's a good scene because a lot of my friends जिन्होंने graduate किए थे वो भी इंडिया में हैं. they are doing pretty well for themselves too.
तो सर फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन वही निकल के आता है. सपोज अभी मैं लाइक स्टूडेंट हूँ, फर्स्ट ईयर, सेकंड ईयर, थर्ड ईयर में, तो मैं को जॉब ज्वाइन करना है फेसबुक. तो मेरे लिए क्या स्टेप रह सकता है, पहले मुझे क्या करना चाहिए?
So Samir, to answer your question, first of all, one thing I want to mention to your readers listeners is Facebook is unique from some of the other big tech companies in one way, in that Facebook does not have an India office, right? So if you want to go to Microsoft, Google, Amazon, you can join their India office and eventually either go to their US office or just be their India office is good enough. Facebook, on the other hand, does not have a India engineering office. Sorry, they do have a sales office, but I'm talking of engineering, and there is no way to do. Okay, so to get to Facebook, either you already have to be in US or there's UK, Singapore, all those two, or like you can get recruited directly from India if you're in IIT or something, or the most common way, and I'll actually take this as a separate question. I'll take this into two questions. One is like, how can you join a big tech company, right? Whether in India or US, if you're say not from a tier 1 college or tier, and secondly, like let's say you're sitting in India, how can you come to US, right?
Yeah, sure.
Let's start with the latter one. How can you come to US if you're sitting in India? So obviously for some people like me, the journey was very different than a lot of people because, like as you said, I graduated from IIT Delhi and we had on-campus placements directly from US companies in our college. I believe some other colleges like BITS, Triple IT, and a lot of like peer colleges, they have a similar thing. But unfortunately for a lot of companies, for a lot of colleges, that's not the case, and they don't have this. And especially if you're like 22, 23 years old, like you'll never get there. But I can tell you right now, like majority of my colleagues, they aren't from IIT, right? Frankly, I don't. For majority of them, I have no idea what college they went to. And there are a lot of Indians, to be honest, here in US, and both in Microsoft and in Facebook. And the most common way by far is that students, they either with work experience or immediately after college, they choose to do masters in US. Now, the main thing to note here is that it's kind of easier to get into masters in US than it is to get into an IIT, right? Of course, it's not as easy to get into masters in MIT or Stanford, but US is not just MIT and Stanford. US has like hundreds of universities, and a lot of students. I would say actually a majority of colleagues who work at like Facebook or Microsoft didn't go into MIT, Stanford. They went into like one of the many other colleges in US, and I wouldn't necessarily call them tier 3. Like a lot of them are very good, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, but they aren't like MIT, Stanford. And getting into Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech and a lot of other colleges, though it's hard, it's not as hard as getting into IIT. So just because you didn't get into IIT, don't think that you won't ever get into Georgia Tech or something. The main thing for getting into colleges, I think first you need to have a pretty decent grade in your college, right? And secondly, you just need to clear the entrance exam good, right? Like there's GRE. And of course, the biggest challenge people face is like it's a lot of money. And I know ki a lot of people who came here, like some borrowed it from their parents, of course.
Yeah.
But lately, like there are schemes like SBI loans and whatnot where there is an interest, right? Like they charge like some 10% interest or something, but they're willing to give loans if you get accepted into a program in US. And to some people, it might seem like a huge risk, right? Like you're taking like a 50 lakh loan or something. And let's say your parents are like nowhere close to that well off. Like, is it fine to pay like 10% interest? I have to say, of course, I can't say that like go for it, like, you have a guaranteed chance. But the chances to get a job in a big tech company once you're already in US is like, let's say like 100 times higher than if you're sitting in India and wondering how. There is a lot of competition, but the competition in India is much, much more. Okay.
Yeah.
US has fewer people, and the people coming here are already like constrained because of visa limitations and whatnot. So once you're here, the situation kind of becomes similar to like if you're in an IIT in India. Companies will come to your college. They have these things called career fairs. It's much easier to get in contact with the company. So by far the biggest challenge which someone from a non-IIT or non-tier 1 college faces, and the main difference is how to get noticed by a company, right? Like, of course, like you can say that like a student from IIT might be better or not better, but let's say that after a few years it's not even true. Like if you put sufficient effort, a lot of my peers who are not from IIT are at least as good as me or even better than me, right? Because they put in a lot of effort. However, they still face some stigma because there's a chance that if I like, or just because of the fact that I have a bigger network of IIT people who are also in like other big tech companies, I can get a recruiter call easier. And that's by far the biggest challenge. So if you do a master in US, you're getting past that big issue. The two main hurdles of getting, one is the visa, right? If you are, the main reason foreign companies don't like to hire overseas is because of visa issues. The visa issues are just too many. The risks are too much. There's visa lotteries and everything. So if they're hired directly from India, it's much harder for the company as well. So basically that's why they just hire very few and only from like 5-10 colleges and nothing else. However, if you have already come to US, a lot of those visa issues, even though you'll still have a visa and everything, but you don't have to compete with all the people in India to get a visa because you already have a student visa. And a student visa to a work visa is much easier to compete. So therefore, as long as you can clear the interview, right? Now it's just about whether you can clear the interview or not. And the starting salaries in a lot of these tech companies pays, in your first year, you'll earn more than the loan you took. Right. So you will be able to pay it off if you can get a job in a big tech. So obviously it's a big risk. I wouldn't necessarily say everyone should do a master, because look, I didn't do one. I didn't have any debt, so I can't say for sure. But I know a lot of my peers, a lot of my colleagues in Microsoft and Facebook came to US in exactly that way. And that's definitely something to consider. Another is like, say you can't afford, and after your college, you take a job in like Infosys, TCS, one of the massacre MRCs, right? Accenture, whatever. It might be very tempting to think that like your career is over and there's no future whatsoever for you. But first, like you can have a great future in India itself, but even not in India. Like I know a lot of people who started in Infosys India, then they came to Infosys US working for their client. And then once they are in US, now again, as I said, once you are in US, all the possibilities are yours. Now it's much easier to get noticed than if you're sitting in India by a US company. So you can come in like Infosys US, like working for a client, but in like few months you can just like prepare and get an interview call from a big tech company and get there. So that's like one of the main things of like how to get to US.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other question is like how to get noticed by big tech companies.
Company. Yeah.
So of course, the first one is like, I'll repeat it with, if you are in a good college, there's a good chance that at the end of your like 4-year, 5-year, whatever your degree is, you will have on-campus placements, and you will have a lot of these big tech companies coming to your campus for placement. I had the exact same situation. However, if you're not from one of them, yeah, it definitely is hard. And I'll be honest, if you try applying online, the chances are no one will ever reply to you. And actually, that's not just for like non-tier one colleges. Even if you're from an IIT and if you try applying to like say Amazon or Microsoft, no one will reply to you. It's only that if they come to your on-campus placement, they will treat you very nicely. But if you try applying online, no one will reply to you. And this is like actually, I'll give my even when I had worked in Microsoft for 6 years, even when I applied to companies, people still didn't reply to me. Okay, so some of it can be very demotivating, but the main thing I want to point there is like, if you don't get replies from like going to the website and filling their careers form, don't get demotivated, because I frankly don't even know if anyone is reading that. Sometimes it might even just go to a trash can or something. Right. So one of the things is like yeah, you can like, I think Samir, you did a great interview with a Google engineer. He went through and talked about competitive programming.
Yeah.
So that's of course one of the main ways where students can start, like with HackerRank. You build a profile and you keep doing this competitive programmings, and if you start getting in a good rank, companies will start taking notice. All big companies hang out there. They're always looking out for like people who are getting good rank, and that's one way. However, that does get very competitive as well. So if you can't do well there too, now I'll talk of like, okay, what if you can't do that either, right? I'd say take whatever job you can get out of your college, because one of the main things is like, when you're 19 or 28, might seem like this is how it'll always be, no one will ever reply to you. But once you have 3-4 years of experience, the part of your resume which says IIT versus your college gets less and less important, and what matters more is like, what was the projects you did and where you did, right? So even if you're working at Infosys, if you're working on projects which are like, which are working on like good software design and whatnot, if you're getting promoted there, then there's a chance that like that itself will get you noticed. Another important thing is like, I will say, like, I don't know what the website is in India, but like do networking via things like Meetup or whatever there is, and there is a chance that if you are meeting sufficient people, you'll start intersecting with some people who already work in these companies. Now, one thing I want to say is like, I do get a lot of pings on LinkedIn. People are trying to add me, and I accept a lot of invites. But if you write to me saying that please give me a referral, I most likely won't give it to you, and that's the same for almost everyone. The reason is that if I have not worked with you, or if I don't know you personally, it dilutes the value of my own referral. If I'm referring my friend tomorrow, right, and if I've referred like people from the internet much more, then no one will take my referral seriously from here. So therefore, like, yeah, on the internet, it might not necessarily be a good idea to like ask people for referral. Yeah, please add people. It's fine. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with just finding random people who work for like a company you want to work and just start adding them. And maybe like keep following them on LinkedIn, see what they do. One of the things is like, lately in India, the startup scene has become very, very good, right? So it's not even necessarily the case that like working for big tech is the best job. Like, you might earn much, much more working for a small company. And a lot of these companies, like, you don't even know, like it would be someone in your LinkedIn profile saying like, hey, I have these job openings, right? And maybe you just added them before and they accepted it. The moment you see this, just like tell them that, hey, I'm interested, send them your resume or something. There's a lot of LinkedIn groups, right? You can join all these groups where like, it's for hiring, or you can start collaborating with people, right? You can collaborate in some GitHub project with people. And once you have that, like, once people start knowing you, they'll start responding to you. and especially with some work experience behind you. Things are very different when you're like 20 versus 23 versus when you're 25, right? People take
Yeah.
notice with your work experience, especially if you're willing to bring something to the table. And if if you aren't there where you dream to be, you might have to be a little bit more proactive on these websites like LinkedIn and all. You might have to keep looking at, like, you have to keep expanding your network, and you have to keep looking at like who's like advertising any job openings, or or sometimes like what you can simply do is you can, like how Samir is doing. He's doing a great job. He's running a YouTube channel, right? Like everyone can start like a blog or something, or you can just start like coding a small website, right? Like in your free time. If you can do something, that is a proof in your uh, resume, which is bigger than just the name of any college, that like, look, hey, I coded this website, right? So that if I am hiring tomorrow and I see like, damn, this boy coded this website, so it kind of resolves a lot of those questions. So therefore, these are multiple things you can do. Whether to get to US, you can do a master's, you can just try to take the job in Infosys, whatever, come to your client. And another thing I'll say, this is like kind of going away from tech. However, if one of the aims you have is like, if you want to just go in tech, then discard my plan. But if you want to just become successful in your career, want to earn more money, and I'll be very honest here, there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to earn more money. I know it's stigmatized. Some people cannot be very open, and they have to say that they're passionate. And look, it's good to be passionate, but you don't have to be super passionate about it. It's as long as you don't hate your job, you can do well. And if you just want to be successful in your life and you want to make money, one of the good things you can do is like after 2-3 years, you can try looking for an MBA. I know a lot of people who went to like, let's say, not a tier 1 college. They worked for 2-3 years somewhere, and then when things were not working in their favor, they did an MBA, right? And they go to like heaps of other things like hotel management, a lot of things, and you don't even have to get to an IIM from there. That's, first of all, getting into an IIM is easier than getting into an IIT, because like CAT is just easier than JE, first of all, right? So that, but even if you don't get into an IIM, right, like there's a lot of other colleges, and if you can do a MBA, after that you can get a good job in investment banking, you can get a good job in consulting, or you can actually even join as a product manager in tech companies itself if you want to continue in tech. And there's a very good chance that the career trajectory you'll have now is much quicker than it would have been if you just never did that MBA, right? So yeah, it will move you away from tech. It will probably move you more into a business kind of role, but your salary potential increases much more. And again, it brings that exact same question of like, it's more expensive to do an MBA, right? So you might have to take a loan, but again, the opportunity of your earning is significantly more. So if you have to take a loan, I would say it's much more worth. Like if you have gotten to an IIM, right, you don't even think of it, like you just take the loan, right? But like, yeah, let's say if you get like 95% percentile or anything, you didn't get into an IIM, you get into XLRI or something. In a lot of situations, it makes sense to get that. And if finance is not an issue for you, then don't even think of it. Like if you aren't in the place in your career where you want to be, and you think that like you're kind of hitting the roadblock, you can branch out in multiple ways. And higher education it's a very good way to break out. And I'll actually say one thing here. Like I've been working for 10 years, right? And like for the first few years, right, when I was 25 or something, if I compared myself to people who are not in IIT, like I was like, yeah, like my salary, whatever, was much higher than my peers who are not in IIT. However, now that I've been working for 10 years, a lot of the people in other colleges kind of evened out. So you should think over a long-term horizon, right? And I know it's like much easier said than done, right? When you are not getting offers, it feels like it's the end of the world. Actually, one of the stories I would like to say is like when I was actually trying to get from IIT, I applied for 27 companies and 23 flat out rejected me just by reading my resume. So I had only 4 interviews. In the 4 interviews, I failed one the first day. So I had only 3 more, right? So if I failed all 3, I would have actually no offers in IIT, and that would be like devastating, right? I did everything, I got into IIT, and I still. So the thing is though, like now I look at it 10 years later and it all seems so stupid. But of course at that point, like if you tell me that like, oh, don't worry about this, it will seem like, it doesn't seem correct. But if you look at the 10-year horizon, so many friends of mine who were like school friends or whatever didn't get into IIT, didn't even do engineering, right? They went into law, commerce, whatnot, and now they're like earning like 40 lakhs per year in India, or they are in US too. They did masters, they did a lot of stuff, and now some of them are at a much better position than me financially or in their career. They're like a manager, some of them are even a director. So it's definitely not like if you didn't get into an IIT or something, it's the end of the world. There are a lot of ways, and if you look at a 10-year horizon, there's a good chance that you will, like, if not overtake, you will probably be able. There's a good chance you can do at least as good as any other IIT peers. And again, you don't have to compare, right? Like, what you want is like, you want to make sure that you lead a good, successful life, and the Indian economy is doing very well. You don't even have to come to US to be successful anymore. The startup economy is amazing. Just keep out on lookout. Like, most of my friends, even from IIT today, are not in big tech companies. They are in startups, and they are doing very well for themselves. And I would say, definitely take advantage of the whole startup economy booming and join there. Even if the startup doesn't succeed, you might learn just too much. You might make a lot of great contacts. And they might be your token to the next big thing. And
So, sir, let's move on to the next question. The next question is, sir, in internet there is a lot of resources for preparing interview, like big tech companies interview. So can you please share some useful resources, and you have used it before?
Actually, that's a great question, Samir. So almost everything I talked about till now was like how to get the interview or how to get noticed, right? The next question is, of course, like, okay, let's say you are getting noticed, how to clear the interview. Right. So here I definitely agree with you. There is a lot of resources, and if you start looking at something like Geeks for Geeks or something, it might seem like it's infinite. Like, I remember when I was reading Geeks for Geeks, I was like, okay, nahi ho payega. I was just like, I give up. Right. So then you have to like definitely look for more targeted resources. So I will say one of the best starting points is this book called Cracking the Coding Interview. Right. It's by Gail Luckman Dowell. So the reason it's good is because it's limited. It's only like 100 or 150 things, and it's laid out in a very good structure, right? Like, you start with like arrays, then strings or something, and then if you can do those 10 questions for each of those things, it builds a lot of confidence. And not just confidence, like I can say with a good chance that if you do just that book and nothing else, there's a good chance that you will be able to clear at least some tech interviews, like a lot of tech interviews. Unfortunately, the landscape of interviews has changed a lot. When I was in 2013, this was the only resource, or there was no lead code or almost anything. So if you did only like 20 questions from Cracking the Coding Interview, there's a good chance you would have cleared. Now this is kind of almost the minimum, right? Given that everyone is prepared, therefore, like, this is kind of a minimum. But still, like, if you can get to a point where you can do the questions in Cracking the Code Interview to a good enough level, and one thing I'll say is, like, don't just read the solution. Try coding them up. Okay, even if you have read the solution, try coding them up. You won't have a debugger and everything in the actual interview. However, that does not mean that you don't have a debugger in your room. At least when you're starting out, use the debugger, use everything as much as possible to the point that you can get fast. When I started out, and forget when I started out in 2013, things are very different then. As I said, you could do only 20-30 questions, and when I started out, like when I was leaving Microsoft, right, in 2020, after 6 years, even then when I started out, I was not able to do any question. Even after like 7 years of experience, I tried doing even lead code easy, and I was like failing to even pass test cases of that. So that's one of the things which, like, if you think that, oh, I can't solve this, I might be very stupid. That's not true. Like, I have IIT, Microsoft, everything, and I still can't solve it. And I'm coding every day for 7 years, and I still can't solve it. The main reason is the skill set to solve interviews is very different from what you do in your day-to-day life. It takes your brain a little bit of getting used to doing that, right? But the thing is, like, once I kept doing that for like 2 months or something, like just like practicing with debugger and all, after a while I could start solving like lead code mediums without needing to read the solution at all, and like not even needing debugger. I would still probably not be able to pass them on the first try. That's very hard. Like, it almost is very, very hard to get there where you can just like solve things on your first try, but I was getting much better where I could just like, I don't have to read the solution. But hey, initially, if you're having to read solutions, absolutely fine. Don't worry. However, just don't get in a position where you're just seeing the solution and moving on and not doing anything. If you do that, then yeah, it's bad. But if you see the solution, then go open a Visual Studio or NetBeans, whatever IDE you use, code it up without seeing the solution. Okay, try making some test cases. Get to a point where you can at least start doing the easy ones. And apart from cracking the code interview, of course, by far the best resource on the internet is LeetCode, right? I would say don't even bother with Geeks for Geeks and all that. It's just too much. You'll be sitting for 6 months. It's just infinite, right? Just do LeetCode and start with easy, like sorted by difficulty. Start with easy. Don't bother with the mediums. Don't even look at the hards. The hards are just way too hard. Even people like me today, I still can't solve the hard. Okay. And most big tech companies mostly don't ask LeetCode hards anymore. Okay. They sometimes do, but mostly they don't.
Okay.
So start with the easies. Get to a point where you are comfortable enough doing easies. Okay. This might take you 10 questions, it might take you 50 questions. All is fine. However, get to a point where, as I said, where you can just like click the submit button and you can pass a question, right? LeetCode says accepted. And it doesn't have to be in your first try. But get to a point where you can do that without seeing the solution. Right? Like it's fine. Like in the first few times, of course, you'll see the solution and then you can come back and still, I'll say, like even if you saw the solution, then go back to your IDE, try it. But once you have done it in the IDE, come back to the LeetCode and try to pass it. One of the suggestions I'll give here is like, don't try to pass it on the same day, because sometimes what happens is like, when you've just tried it and when you've just read the solution, it's very fresh in your mind. But if you try it like 2-3 days later, you might forget. So one of the things is like if you, let's say you tried like 4 or 5 questions, you read the solutions, you tried them in the Visual Studio, don't go and submit it today itself. Come back like 2-3 days later for those same questions and try submitting it. See if you can still write it without like seeing the solution. And one thing I do want to emphasize, like a lot of people might think, oh, like I'm asking you to memorize LeetCode. That's not true at all. However, that said, it's not completely wrong either. A lot of questions do come from LeetCode, and it's very stupid for me to say like, oh, don't practice and don't like just like read it like Corman or something and just like, without practice. If you go and compete with a person who has seen the exact same question or done a lot of practice on LeetCode, right, they'll do better, end of story, irrespective of how good your concepts are. So therefore, it is a very good idea to practice and get to a point where given a question which is like LeetCode kind of question, you can pass it, like you can get accepted. So yeah, as I said, like don't try to submit it on the same day. Give it a few days break. Keep doing other questions as well, but like for the questions you couldn't pass or you got stuck on, come to it in a 2-3 day break. And then after having read the solution, after having passed it in your IDE and everything, come back and try to see from scratch if you can pass it again today. If you can't, see the solution, whatever. But again, don't try to pass it the same day. However, once you do that, make a repeated process where you can get to a point where at least for LeetCode easies, you can get to be accepted without seeing the solution. Once you start getting there, this is where things start getting like to a point where you can like start getting comfortable and you can start getting more and more. So I say there are some tabs like on the right and LeetCode, there's this thing like top 100 interview questions. Okay, this is a much concise resource than just trying to like do LeetCode randomly. It says 100, but it's unfortunately 150 questions. Okay, so again, I'll say like once you have started getting good with the easies, take this list of like top 100 questions, again sorted again and again start with easies. Okay, once you can do the easies there, then you start tackling the first mediums. Okay, and sorted by the acceptance rate. I think that's how, like that's the column I use, and sort on the acceptance rate. Now you do the first medium, which has the highest chance of acceptance, right? And if you suddenly see that like you can clear that, your confidence will increase a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that do this list because this is like a question will most likely come from that, right? That's just the wrong way to think about it. However, what I'm saying is like this list is a good enough compilation of some questions from every data structure which gets asked on, so that if you can do this list comfortably, there is a very good chance any question being asked, you can do any question comfortably, right? So of course lead code now has like 2000 questions or something. You can't do 2000 questions, right? You can't even do like 500 questions. It will take forever. It will drive you crazy. So start small. Start with just easies. Once you start getting comfortable easies, go to the top 100 interview questions on lead code. Start doing that. Again, start by acceptance. And then once you see that like, oh, okay, you're getting comfortable, maybe start randomizing. There's this thing called pick one on lead code, right? So what you can do is just like click the pick one and then like see how good you're able to do. If you can even get to the point where you're doing these things good, then another thing I'd say is like don't be in a state of like constantly doing more and more, because sometimes it's hard to know when to stop.
Yes,
At
sir.
one point when you are starting to do this well, just stop there and start applying. I mean, don't stop, still start preparing, but start applying.
Okay.
Start asking your friends for referrals. Start like hunting on LinkedIn, post that I'm open to job openings or whatever. Okay, also on LinkedIn there is a setting called open to work. Only recruiters can see it, right? Only recruiters can see it. Your boss can't see it. So make sure that when you're applying, when you're ready, change that first thing, and then you'll start getting reach outs from some recruiters or headhunters. And yeah, as I said, don't keep doing infinitely. After a certain point, I'll say like this number is different from everyone, but like even something as less as 100 could be sufficient. You can just do something as less as 100, and that might be sufficient. The other thing I want to say is, this is if you're an experienced engineer, right, and you're trying to move companies, then they'll also ask you this thing called system design.
Okay.
Right. And system design is very, very different from lead code kind of questions. Now the question there is like a sample question is like design a Facebook newsfeed, right? And people will be like, oh, I don't know what to design. Like, oh, do I design like the image size? No, they are asking a very different, like a server, backend server architecture of how you can do it in a distributed manner, right? Like the questions are like, okay, how do you design it if it's just like for you and your friend? Okay, but now what if there are 10,000 users? What if there is a million users?
Oh.
And the interviewer wants to see whether you can understand the challenges of what it takes for a system to scale, right? As you move from just one or like something in your own computer to something in a distributed system. Now this is a concept which if you're new, you won't be asked almost ever. But if you have like say 3 years of experience, you will be asked this. Best resources for preparing system design, I'll say two of them. One is this course called Grokking the System Design Interview. There is this website called educative.io. They have this, just I think they have only 20 there. You just read them, you get comfortable with it, and once you can do that, that's good. The other resource I'd say is there's these YouTube channels, and most of them are run by Indians, right? So you don't even have to. So one is by this guy called Tushar Roy. He is like a ex-Apple, Amazon Apple engineer, but he has only 5-6 videos. But those 5-6 videos are brilliant, right? Like if you can see them, like you really start understanding what this is about. And then there's this other guy, Gaurav Sen. Okay, he also has a channel. I don't remember the name of the channel, but he also helps us understanding a lot of these concepts around distributed system, like caching and like what's LRU cache, all these things which consistent hashing, like things which you might not necessarily know if you haven't been doing this already. And if you see his videos, the concepts start becoming clear. And the third one is this thing called Tech for Dummies by this guy called Narendra. Now this one I'll try to avoid just because he has way too many videos. Right. So if you start doing that, it's again the same challenge, right? Like you keep watching, and you don't know when to stop. He does a good job at explaining his things, but yeah, I'll say start with just this, with Tushar Roy and Gaurav Sen's videos, and then look at this other one, the Grokking the System Design. The main thing I have to tell is the Grokking the System Design is not a free course. That's why I would say like start with the other one. Start with the free resources on YouTube, and then you can jump into that. So yeah, that's the main things. Like lead code, don't go crazy. Just like pick, and cracking the code interview is the book, right? If you want to start in something which is very well organized by like chapters, like arrays, strings, linked lists, and it's also like that important that like today it's almost considered like if you can't solve questions which are in cracking the coding interview, it's kind of almost a minimum expectation that if it's in that book, you should be able to solve it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's how it has become. So therefore, it's like, yeah, it's fine if you can't buy the book because you're in college or whatever, you don't have money. So you can look at the ebooks, which has some of the chapters. So you can start from there. But yeah, once you're getting serious in your preparation, just buy the book. You can buy from a second-hand store if you don't have money, right? It should be like 300, 400 rupees, not more, from a second-hand shop. And yeah, then definitely just go to lead code, and as I said, like, start with the easies, then go to the top 100. And
Okay.
at one point, you just have to decide to stop. You can't keep going. But yeah, while you're talking to recruiters and all, don't
Mm-hmm.
stop, because the main thing you
Hmm.
have for you is momentum. What you
Yeah.
need is, like, if you have been practicing every day,
Hmm.
if an interviewer asks you a question which you have never seen,
Hmm.
it doesn't matter. If you are in the good momentum, you can solve that. However, if you're out of
Hmm.
practice, right? Like, let's say you're practicing and then you stop practicing, there's a good chance that if you stop practicing for the last 2 months, even if you
Hmm.
practice for 5 months before that, you will not be able to solve questions, irrespective of how good you are, because you get rusty. So the main thing is to keep doing it, like, keep the momentum. And
Hmm.
if you want to be, like, consistent, like, even if you're not looking for jobs, there's this,
Hmm.
like, I think Lead Code has a weekly contest or something. Same with HackerRank, there's like these weekly contests that ensures that you're constantly in that zone where you are never getting, like, very rusty. That said, if you're doing a full-time job, it's very hard to keep doing that. Like, your job takes so much out of you that you don't really want to be solving challenges on Lead Code every week, unless you're actually actively looking for a job.